Hey y'all, it's Megan, and in this video, I'm sewing up the Sydney pattern. It is a skirt with two links, and then there's also this separate shorty option, and I am sewing up the separate shorties in this video. If you want to see how to sew it with the skirt, then I will link that video down below. The first step is going to be to sew the waistband, and you are going to put your two main pieces right sides together, the front main waistband and back main waistband, and you are going to sew them together at each side using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. You're going to do the same thing with your lining waistband pieces, putting the front and back right sides together along the sides and then stitching them together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Then you are going to keep your main waistband wrong side out and flip that lining waistband right side out. Then stick the lining waistband inside the main, nesting those seams. So I like to press the seam on the main waistband toward the back and the seam on the lining waistband to the front so those seams lay flat. And I'm pinning them together at the seam first, and then I'm going to pin them together along the rest of the top of the front and back waistband. Once you have them all pinned together and those raw edges nicely matching, then you are going to stitch the two waistbands together using a 1/4 inch seam allowance. If your fabric doesn't have great recovery, you could also add a little bit of 1/4 inch clear elastic to this seam. Then you're going to press that seam toward the lining and you are going to understitch. So you are using a stretch stitch. I'm using a longer triple stitch here, and I am edge stitching right next to that seam about 1/8 inch away, catching the seam allowance under so that the lining doesn't roll to the front while wearing. You could also do a top stitch here if you prefer that look. Then you're just going to press that lining waistband toward the wrong side. You could baste the bottoms together now if you'd like, and then 1/4 your waistband and just set it aside. The first step for the shorties, if you're adding the optional pocket, then you are going to press a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side on the top of your pocket piece, and you are going to use a stretch stitch and edge stitch that in place to hem the top of each pocket. Next, you're going to lay your side panel piece with the right sides up, and you are going to place your pocket piece also right sides up, aligning the bottom raw edges and the notches, and you are going to pin that pocket in place and then baste the pocket to the side panel along all three edges, about 1/8 inch away from the edge, and you're going to repeat that with the other side panel and pocket piece. Make sure if you're using a solid here that you have a right side panel and a left side panel. Then it's time to attach the side panel to a front leg. So you are going to align those right sides together and aligning those notches, and you are going to stitch from the bottom hem up to the top waist using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then if you'd like, you can press that seam toward the front shorties and top stitch in place using a stretch stitch. Then you are going to attach the other side of your side panel to your back leg. So again, with right sides of the side panel to the right sides of the back leg, aligning those notches, you're going to stitch the two together from the bottom to the waist using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then again, you can top stitch if you'd like. Next, I like to create a memory press on the bottom of the leg by pressing a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side. Then you are going to put the front and back right sides together and align from the crotch to the hem, and you are going to stitch that inseam using a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you're going to repeat all of those steps so that you have two legs. You're going to have one leg right side out and one leg inside out. Put the right side leg inside the other so that they are right sides together. Again, nest those seams on the crotch and then pin your shorts together along that back crotch curve and front crotch curve from the waist through the inseam all the way to the other side of the waist. Once you have these all pinned together, then you are going to stitch this seam using a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Pull those legs right side out, and now it's time to repress that memory press that you made along the bottom so that we can hem the bottom edge of each leg. So if you didn't create that memory press, you're going to press a 1/2 inch toward the wrong side, and then you are going to hem it in place using a stretch stitch. So longer triple stitch, zigzag, lightning bolt, or a cover stitch machine. And you're going to repeat that on each leg. The last step is to add the waistband to the shorties. So you already quartered your waistband, and you're going to do the same thing to your shorties. Then you're going to put the waistband right sides together to the shorties, matching those quarter points, and you will slightly stretch the waistband to the shorties. There's not a ton of negative ease that the band has to the shorties because the shorties are already very tight. So you just barely stretch that waistband and then use a 1/2 inch seam allowance to stitch it together. Then pull the waistband away from the shorties and they are complete. As always, if you have any questions, you can leave them down below and I will try to answer them. If you make a pair of Sydney shorties or a skirt, then I would love to see them. Please post them in our Facebook group or tag me on Instagram at Made for Mermaids, hashtag Made for Mermaids Patterns, hashtag Sydney Pattern.